My name is Eleanor Brooks. I thought I knew what betrayal looked like until I tested the people I called family. After winning the lottery, I didn't tell anyone. Not out of greed, but because I had to know who would show up for me when I had nothing to offer. I faked losing everything, my job, my health, my savings, and asked for help. One by one, the people I had supported for years vanished. But someone I least expected showed up. And what happened next? It changed everything. If you think family always has your back, this story will challenge everything you believe. Eleanor Brooks had never been one for grand celebrations. Her 39th birthday was no exception. It was a drizzly Thursday in Seattle. Grey skies, damp sidewalks, and the familiar hum of passing buses outside her small apartment window. She spent the day working overtime as usual at the mid-tier law office where she handled accounts and reconciliations. The job was tedious. The fluorescent lights unflattering, but the paycheck came every 2 weeks like clockwork. Consistency had become her comfort zone. After work, Eleanor stopped at the corner store on 5th and Pine, the same one she had visited every Friday evening for the past 5 years. The cashier, Leo, greeted her with his usual tired smile. "Birthday today, right?" he asked as she handed over a $20 bill. She nodded. "Yep, let's double it today. 2 tickets instead of 1. He handed her the slips. "Maybe this year's different." On a whim, instead of letting the machine pick the numbers, she filled them in herself. Her mother's birth date, her father's, her younger brother, her older sister, and last, her Aunt Laura's birthday, the only person in her family who had never asked her for anything, who only ever gave. The numbers were symbols more than anything else. A quiet, almost ironic tribute to a family that had drained her slowly over the years. Back home, she didn't check the numbers right away. She ordered Chinese takeout, fed her cat Luna, poured herself a glass of red wine, and sat on the worn couch that sagged just slightly in the middle. The lottery results were playing in the background, but she was scrolling through birthday wishes on Facebook, half-hearted comments from high school friends, distant co-workers. It was only when she heard the announcer repeat the numbers that something clicked. Slowly she picked up her ticket, read the numbers again, then again. Her heart thudded once, then again faster. They matched, all of them. She stared at the screen, then at the ticket. Her fingers trembled. This couldn't be real. $42 million. The shock didn't hit like a lightning bolt. It came like cold water seeping through clothes, a creeping, paralysing chill. Eleanor didn't scream or dance. She didn't even smile. Instead, she felt the room get quieter, heavier. Because suddenly she wasn't poor, and that meant her family would come running. Memories surfaced like bruises. 3 years ago, her sister had called crying, saying she couldn't afford the venue deposit for her wedding. Eleanor had maxed out a credit card to help. No thank you note ever came. Her brother, always full of grand business ideas, had begged her for a $5,000 startup fund for his organic beard oil company. She never saw a single bottle or the money again. Her father had needed help urgently to fix the roof after a winter storm. Weeks later, Eleanor saw Facebook photos of him and his wife in Cancun, cocktail in hand. She had been the safety net for everyone else's failures. The one with a good head on her shoulders, the one who always figured things out. But no one had asked how she was holding up. No one had offered to help her when her radiator broke in December, when she couldn't afford a new laptop for work, when Luna needed emergency vet care. They only came around when they wanted something. Her bank account was treated like a family resource, except it had never belonged to anyone but her. And now she had $42 million. More than enough to buy a house, quit her job, travel the world, and never worry about another bill in her life. But instead of joy, all she felt was dread. Because she knew if they found out, every call, every visit, every "I miss you" would be loaded with expectation. Money would become the currency of their love. And Eleanor had learned long ago that in her family, love came with receipts. So she made a decision, sitting there alone with the winning ticket in hand and cold dumplings on the table. She wouldn't tell a soul, not yet, not them, maybe not ever. Eleanor didn't sleep that night. She sat cross-legged on her bed with her laptop glowing in the dark. Her cat curled beside her and an uneaten slice of birthday cake on the nightstand. She typed frantically, diving headfirst into the rabbit hole of lottery winners' stories. It didn't take long for her awe to turn into unease. Every third story was a cautionary tale. One man had won $25 million and was bankrupt within 3 years. Another woman had her identity leaked and spent the next 5 years fending off fake friends, lawsuits and even death threats. Families torn apart, siblings in court battles, parents turning cold and manipulative. Money didn't solve their problems, it magnified them. It didn't bring happiness, it brought chaos. By sunrise, Eleanor had made up her mind. She would claim the money, but she would do it silently, smartly and with every legal layer of protection possible. She called in sick for the first time in years and booked a same-day consultation with a law firm, NUD, that specialised in estate and financial planning. When she arrived at the office later that afternoon, dressed in her modest office attire, the receptionist barely looked up. "Do you have an appointment?" "Yes, Eleanor Brooks." She was led into a sleek conference room where a man in his early 50s introduced himself as Martin Keller, a financial attorney with a calm demeanour and expensive glasses. "How can I help you today?" he asked. Eleanor didn't speak at first. She simply pulled the folded lottery ticket from her purse and placed it on the table. Martin blinked once, then leaned forward. After verifying the numbers, he gave a slow nod. "Well then," he said, "let's talk privacy." Over the next 2 hours, Eleanor learned more about blind trusts, nominee claimants, and asset protection than she ever thought she'd need to know. They created a legal entity that would claim the winnings anonymously. The money would be divided across several investment accounts, trusts, and holding companies. Her name would never appear publicly. She wouldn't be listed on any searchable registries. The wealth would exist, but she would remain invisible. Martin warned her gently, "You'll need to maintain a consistent lifestyle. Any drastic change will raise questions. Keep your job. Stay in your apartment. No sudden car purchases or lavish trips." Eleanor agreed. The anonymity wasn't just legal, it was emotional armour. Over the next few weeks, she lived a quiet double life. By day, she returned to the same office cubicle, attending budget meetings and reviewing invoices like nothing had changed. By night, she pored over spreadsheets that tracked her newly growing investments. The freedom was intoxicating. No more stress about rent. No more panic over surprise bills. And yet the weight in her chest hadn't lifted. People around her hadn't changed because they didn't know. And that, strangely, began to bother her. She realised she didn't just want to avoid being used. She wanted to know, truly, deeply, who in her life actually cared. Who would help her if she had nothing to offer? Who would stand by her if she was vulnerable, not useful? An idea began to take shape, dangerous, uncomfortable, but irresistible. What if she flipped the narrative? What if she pretended to lose everything? Instead of revealing that she had won the lottery, Eleanor would fabricate a story. That her company had shut down suddenly, that she was unemployed, struggling to cover rent, facing mounting medical bills. She would reach out to the people she had supported over the years, her sister, her brother, her parents, even a few extended relatives. She'd ask for help, not a massive amount, just enough to see how they'd respond. Would they offer kindness, or would they disappear? The plan was simple. The rules were clear, and her intention wasn't to trap or shame anyone, it was to understand. Eleanor needed clarity, even if it hurt, because the money had given her freedom but not peace. And peace, she realised, would only come when she knew who she could truly count on. She closed her laptop, heart thudding, not with fear, but with certainty. Tomorrow she would begin her experiment. By the next morning, Eleanor was already crafting the story in her head. It had to be believable, down to every last detail. The truth was, her law firm had indeed been going through some budget cuts. She'd overheard enough whispers in the hallway to make her version plausible. But in her narrative, the story would be more dramatic. The firm collapsed overnight due to an internal embezzlement scandal. Senior partners under investigation. Entire departments shut down. No severance packages, just a memo and a locked front door. She sat at her dining table with a legal pad and pen, old habits from college days, and began drafting her crisis script. The setup was simple. She had lost her job suddenly, was waiting on unemployment benefits that were taking longer than expected, and had recently undergone a series of medical tests for a condition she didn't want to name, but hinted might be serious. Rent was due. Her savings had dried up. She needed $6,000 to get through the next 2 months. The number was intentional, not too small to be trivial, not so large it would raise suspicion. Just enough to make someone pause, to consider, to evaluate. The number would tell her everything she needed to know. Every detail had to hold up under scrutiny. She created a fake LinkedIn update about her job loss, drafted emails to pretend she'd applied to various companies, even left voice memos to herself to rehearse the perfect strained but hopeful tone. It wasn't acting, this was survival. This was clarity, masked as crisis. Then came the list. 10 names, 10 relationships, 10 emotional investments. Her mother, Janice, retired, remarried, living comfortably with Eleanor's stepfather in a beachside condo. Her father, Douglas, still teaching high school, remarried to Stephanie, the woman who had always seen Eleanor as baggage. Her sister, Melanie, married to an orthopaedic surgeon living in a 5-bedroom house with 2 kids and a golden retriever. Her brother, Chris, between jobs again, always with a new hustle. Stephanie, the stepmother, never pretended to care. Tina, her former best friend. A nurse turned wellness coach who had ghosted Eleanor over a petty misunderstanding 2 years ago. Marcus, her cousin, self-proclaimed entrepreneur, last seen asking Facebook friends for angel investors. Aunt Jean, her mother's sister, always judgmental, always dramatic. Clara, her work colleague, friendly but distant, shared coffee breaks and occasional memes. Aunt Laura, last on the list, not because she was least important, but because Eleanor already knew the answer. Laura would give her the last dollar in her bank account if she thought Eleanor needed it. Eleanor stared at the names. Some she wrote with a sigh, others with a tightening in her chest. These were people she had helped, people she had covered for, lent money to, stood up for, people who had eaten at her table, cried on her shoulder, taken her for granted. She wasn't trying to punish them. This wasn't revenge. She just needed to know, because if even one of them offered genuine help, without conditions, without expectations, then maybe, just maybe, there was something salvageable in those ties. Her plan wasn't perfect, she knew that. People had their own burdens, their own reasons for hesitating, but she wasn't testing for generosity, she was testing for empathy. Would they listen, ask questions, offer comfort, or would they scroll past her like a stranger's GoFundMe? She folded the paper in half, placing it next to her phone. One by one she would call them, not in order of closeness or guilt or logic, but in the order her heart needed to know. Tomorrow she would begin with the one who gave her life. Her mother. Eleanor waited until late Saturday morning to make her first call. Her mother, Janice, answered after the 3rd ring, her voice as breezy as ever. "Ellie, how's my favourite daughter?" The greeting stung a little. Eleanor was her only daughter. She launched gently into the script. "Mum, something happened at work. The firm shut down. There's this whole legal mess going on, and I didn't get my final paycheck." She kept her tone casual, as if trying not to burden her mother too much. "Oh no, sweetheart, that's terrible," Janice replied, though she didn't sound entirely surprised. "But you're smart, you'll bounce back. I've always told you that you should have gone into something more stable," Eleanor pressed on. "I'm okay for now, but I've had some medical stuff come up too, and my emergency fund is gone. I hate to ask, but I need some help. About $6,000, just to get through the next couple months." A pause, a longer one than Eleanor expected. "Well, you know Warren and I just put in that new kitchen," Janice finally said, her tone shifting to awkwardness. "And the property taxes this year were a nightmare. I don't know if we can swing that right now." Eleanor's chest tightened. "Even alone, Mum, just until I'm back on my feet." "I'll have to talk to Warren," her mother said quickly. "Let me see what we can do, okay?" Eleanor thanked her, knowing she wouldn't hear back. She hung up, marking a small X next to her mother's name. The next call went to her father, Douglas. He listened with an even tone, occasionally interjecting with a or that's rough. When she finished, he launched into a lecture about savings, personal responsibility, and how he had warned her for years that law firms weren't as stable as they seemed. I'd love to help, he said, but Stephanie and I are focused on our retirement goals. We can't compromise that, but this will be a good growth experience for you. Growth experience. Eleanor clenched her jaw. 2 calls, 2 letdowns. She moved through the list over the weekend, each interaction peeling back layers of optimism. Her sister Melanie sobbed about the cost of the kids' private school and promised to see what Paul says. Her brother Chris didn't even answer, just texted, "That sucks, sis. Hope things turn around soon." Stephanie, her stepmother, said flat out, "You're not my responsibility." Clara, her co-worker, awkwardly redirected the conversation and never brought it up again. But the hardest call, the one Eleanor had dreaded most, was to Tina. Tina had once been her person, the friend who showed up at midnight with ice cream, who knew her coffee order by heart, who had been by her side through heartbreak and layoffs and health scares. But they hadn't spoken in over a year, ever since a misunderstanding about a missed birthday dinner spiralled into silence. Still, Eleanor called. Tina picked up after a few rings. "Ellie?" "Hey," Eleanor said softly. "I know it's been a while, but I could really use someone right now." She told Tina everything, or at least the version she'd crafted: job loss, medical bills, rent due. "I wouldn't be reaching out if I wasn't desperate," she finished. There was silence on the other end. Then Tina's voice came, cold and measured. "So this is why you called? After ghosting me for over a year? You want money?" Eleanor's stomach dropped. "I didn't ghost you. We just fell out of touch." "No," Tina snapped. "You stopped showing up and now, out of nowhere, you need something. That's not friendship. That's manipulation." "I'm not trying to manipulate you," Eleanor whispered. But the line had already gone dead. A moment later, a text popped up. "Don't contact me again." Blocked. Eleanor stared at the screen, her chest hollow. She hadn't expected Tina to jump in with a check, but she hadn't expected that. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was the realization that when stripped of what she could give, her reliability, her time, her emotional labour, people disappeared, one by one, like smoke slipping through fingers. This wasn't a test, it was an autopsy, and the cause of death was trust. Eleanor waited 2 full days after her call with her mother. No return call, no follow-up text, nothing but the hollow silence that now seemed to echo louder than any rejection could. She gave it one more push, a soft reminder. "Hey Mum, just checking in. Any update?" Read. No reply. By the 3rd day, she marked it mentally. Confirmed. Her mother had chosen comfort over compassion. Janice wouldn't even respond. Not a "sorry, we can't," not a "thinking of you," just nothing. And that hurt more than the no. Still, Eleanor wasn't done. Her father, Douglas, had always prided himself on being the rational one in the family. Steady, logical, pragmatic. Surely he'd approach her request with fairness, if not warmth. They met for coffee on a Wednesday afternoon at a quiet shop 2 blocks from his school. Eleanor kept her tone humble, practiced. She ran through her story again: lost job, medical bills, apartment hanging by a thread. She asked for $6,000, but emphasised she understood if that wasn't possible. Her father sipped his espresso slowly, eyebrows knitted in a thoughtful frown. Then he leaned back, folded his arms and exhaled. "Eleanor," he said, "this is why I've always told you to build a 6-month emergency fund. Unexpected things happen, that's life." She nodded. "I did, but I didn't expect this much this fast." He continued undeterred. "Look, I sympathise, I really do. But you're almost 40, sweetheart. This is when you should be helping others, not asking for help. You've always been responsible. What happened?" "I got overwhelmed," she said quietly. "I'm just trying to stay afloat. You know, when I was your age, I was supporting 2 households and paying off a mortgage. We made it work." Eleanor pressed her hands together under the table to keep them from trembling. "I'm not asking for a handout, just some support while I get back on my feet." Douglas shook his head slowly. Stephanie and I are tightening up our budget for retirement. We can't just throw $6,000 around. Besides, this might be the lesson you need. Sometimes hardship builds resilience. She felt her throat tighten. So that's a no. It's a not right now, he replied, patting her hand like she was a child who'd failed a math test. She left the cafe with a pit in her stomach. Not because he'd said no, she expected that, but because he'd dressed it up in moral superiority. He'd framed her need as weakness, her vulnerability as failure, and now it was time to face the hardest call yet, Chris. Her younger brother had always been the charming one, the golden boy with big dreams, none of which ever panned out. Eleanor had bailed him out of more than one failed business idea, always believing, hoping he'd finally turn things around. She sent the message first, soft and simple. Hey Chris, can we talk? I need some help. Seen. No reply. 12 hours passed. She followed up, I lost my job. Medical bills are piling up. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious. Seen again. No reply. 2 days later she tried calling, straight to voicemail. She called again, blocked. The message couldn't be clearer if it had been chiselled in stone. He wasn't going to help, not even with a conversation, not even with a damn, sorry, I can't. Eleanor stared at the screen in disbelief. For years she had covered his rent, co-signed on his lease, even sent him birthday gifts when he forgot hers. She hadn't expected him to save her, but she hadn't expected to be erased. The realisation hit like a cold slap. She wasn't a sister, she was a service, and now that she had nothing to give, the contract had been cancelled. She turned her phone face down on the table, blinking back the burn in her eyes. 3 people she had loved, 3 people she had sacrificed for, gone. And somehow the silence screamed louder than any words could. Next on Eleanor's list was her sister, Melanie. They hadn't been close in recent years, but there had been a time, back when they were teenagers, when they shared secrets late into the night, whispering under blankets with flashlights. That version of Melanie had long faded, replaced by a woman perpetually overwhelmed by suburban life, ballet recitals, gluten-free snacks, and PTA politics. Eleanor called on a Monday morning. Melanie picked up immediately, her voice frazzled and full of chaos. Ellie, hey, I've got like 5 minutes. Aidan's got a fever and Paul's in one of his moods again. I won't take long, Eleanor promised, and began her story. She kept it simple, familiar. Job loss, rent due, some scary medical stuff she was still figuring out. I hate asking, but I need help. $6,000 to cover me until I get things sorted. There was a pause on the other end. Then Melanie sighed loudly. God, I'm so sorry you're going through this. That's awful, really. But, it's just the worst timing. Paul's been stressed at the hospital and the bathroom remodel went way over budget. You know how expensive everything is now. Eleanor didn't say anything. And the kids' tuition is due this week, Melanie added, almost like an apology. So you can't help? I mean, not the whole thing, but I can Venmo you a little, like a gesture. Would that help? Anything helps, Eleanor said, though her voice had gone flat. 5 minutes later, a notification pinged her phone. $100, a $100 gesture, a symbolic offering, a way to say I care, but only to the extent it doesn't inconvenience me. Eleanor stared at it for a long moment, then typed a quick thank you and moved on. Her next call was to Aunt Jean, her mother's younger sister. Jean had always been judgmental, the kind of woman who commented on people's weight at family dinners and gave unsolicited advice about everything from investments to lipstick shades. Still, Eleanor called. The conversation was brief. Oh, Eleanor, Jean said with a sharp inhale, it's really unfortunate what's happening to you, but haven't you always been a bit dramatic? Excuse me? Eleanor asked. Well, losing a job isn't the end of the world. You're single, no kids. You can downsize, sell some things, maybe move to a cheaper neighbourhood. $6,000 is a lot of money to ask from family. I wouldn't ask if I wasn't in real need. And maybe if you didn't buy expensive coffee or have that cat. What's its name, Luna? You'd have more savings. Eleanor didn't reply. Look, I wish you the best, Jean said, but I think you need to reevaluate your priorities. This might be a blessing in disguise. Tough love, darling. She hung up before Eleanor could say another word. Eleanor sat at her kitchen table, the same one where she used to host Thanksgiving dinner when no one else wanted to. The room felt colder now, smaller. That night she scrolled social media, an unhealthy habit but familiar, and froze on a photo posted by her cousin, Marcus. A group shot at a backyard barbecue. Her father stood among them, holding a beer, laughing mid-sentence. The caption read, "Uncle Doug telling the story about his daughter who still can't manage her finances at almost 40, classic." Her breath caught. She clicked the comments. Laughter, jokes, a few laughing emojis. One said, "You raised her too soft, Uncle D." Eleanor felt something shift inside her. This wasn't just silence anymore. This was betrayal, spoken, shared, laughed at. He hadn't just refused to help. He had mocked her, publicly, at a party, with people who once sat at her table and ate food she'd cooked. The pain hit in waves, not just rejection, humiliation. She closed the app and stared at the ceiling, her body still, her mind buzzing. There was no more pretending. This wasn't a test. This was grief. Grieving the family she thought she had. Grieving the illusion that love could be unconditional. She was alone. And now, finally, she knew it for sure. Eleanor was sitting by the window, phone in hand, thumb hovering over Aunt Laura's name in her contact list. She had saved Laura for last, not because she was least important, but because she was the only one Eleanor still hoped wouldn't disappoint her. The only one who might see her, not as a burden or a mistake or a failure, but as someone worth loving, worth showing up for. She took a shaky breath, ready to hit call. And then the phone rang. It was Aunt Laura. Eleanor blinked, startled. "Hi, honey," came Laura's soft voice, gentle and clear. "I just heard from your mom. She mentioned something about your job. Are you okay?" That one question cracked something open inside Eleanor. No judgment, no disbelief, no sighs or financial lectures, just, "Are you okay?" I'm hanging in there," Eleanor replied, her voice catching unexpectedly in her throat. There was a pause, and then Laura asked, "Have you eaten?" The question caught Eleanor off guard. Coffee, mostly." "Oh, sweetheart," Laura murmured, as if that simple truth said more than any long explanation could. "That settles it. You're having lunch with me tomorrow. My treat. I won't take no for an answer." Eleanor tried to protest. "I don't want to be a burden." "Nonsense," Laura said. "You've never been a burden. You're family. Come hungry. Noon. That little cafe on 4th. The one with the chalkboard menus." Eleanor smiled, despite the heaviness still sitting in her chest. "Okay," she whispered. "Thank you." Laura didn't ask how much money she needed. She didn't demand an explanation. She didn't mention who told her or press for gossip. She simply heard the pain in Eleanor's voice and responded with kindness. After they hung up, Eleanor sat in silence for a long time, phone resting on her lap. Her heartbeat slower now. Something inside her had shifted. Not healed, not entirely, but softened. The next day she arrived at the cafe 5 minutes early. Laura was already there, sitting at a table near the window, wearing her usual soft cardigan and silver-rimmed glasses. She stood up as Eleanor approached and pulled her into a warm, grounding hug. "Hi, my girl," she said. And it wasn't just a greeting, it was a welcome, a promise. They ordered simple meals, grilled cheese and tomato soup for Laura, a chicken salad sandwich and iced tea for Eleanor. Laura chatted about her community garden, a new student in her book club who asked too many questions, the hummingbirds that had returned to her balcony. She didn't mention the job. She didn't mention the money. Not until they were finishing dessert, a slice of shared lemon pie, did Laura glance up and gently say, "You know, you don't have to talk about anything you're not ready to. But I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Eleanor looked at her aunt, the lines around her eyes etched deeper than she remembered, silver strands more prominent in her hair. She realised that Laura, who had so little to give materially, had always offered the most important thing of all, presence. She wasn't trying to fix anything. She was just there. When the bill came, Laura waved off Eleanor's hand and slid her card to the edge of the table. "You'll take care of lunch next time," she said with a wink. Eleanor felt something press against the back of her eyes. She nodded. "Yeah, I will." As they stood to leave, Laura touched her arm. "You're going to be okay, Eleanor. Whatever this is, you'll come through it." And for the first time in days, Eleanor almost believed it. Not because of the money in her hidden accounts, not because of any master plan, but because someone still saw her. They walked out of the cafe together, the sky a soft overcast grey, warm with the promise of spring but still holding the chill of early April. Eleanor expected the lunch to end there, just a kind gesture, a shared meal and a quiet goodbye. But Laura gently looped her arm through hers. "Come walk with me," she said. They strolled along the quiet street in companionable silence until they reached Laura's car, a faded blue sedan with duct tape holding part of the rearview mirror in place. Laura opened the passenger door and reached inside her glove compartment, retrieving a small cream envelope folded and worn. She held it out without fanfare. "What's this?" Eleanor asked, blinking. Laura didn't answer right away. She just smiled, small and warm. "I had a feeling you might need it." Eleanor opened the flap and stared down at a neat stack of bills, $3,500 in cash. I can't take this," Eleanor whispered, heart pounding. "Laura, this is a lot." Laura shook her head. "It's not as much as you think. Just part of my savings. I've been setting some aside just in case. But your retirement, your medications, I get by, you know that." Laura squeezed Eleanor's hand. "This isn't about money, it's about showing up. And if this helps you breathe a little easier, then it's worth it." Eleanor stood frozen, the envelope trembling in her hand. No one had done this. Not her parents, not her siblings, not even the friends who used to say they loved her. Laura, who had the least, had given the most. "And if it gets tight," Laura added casually, "you can always come stay with me. I've still got that pull-out sofa in the den. It's lumpy, but you know, there's room. There's always room for you." Eleanor's breath caught. Her voice came out broken. "Why?" Laura looked at her gently. "Because you're mine. Maybe not by birth, but by choice. I don't have a lot, sweetheart, but I've always got a place for you. Always." And that was it. That was the moment the dam broke. The tears came fast and hot, streaming down Eleanor's cheeks before she could stop them. She sobbed into her aunt's shoulder, hands shaking around the envelope, unable to speak for several minutes. Laura just held her, humming gently, rubbing slow circles on her back like she had when Eleanor was 8 and afraid of thunderstorms. "I have to tell you something," Eleanor finally choked out. "Something big." Laura pulled back, brushing the hair from her niece's damp forehead. "Okay." "I didn't lose my job," Eleanor said, still gasping between tears. "None of that was real. I made it up." Laura blinked, not in confusion, but quiet patience. I won the lottery," Eleanor said, 6 weeks ago. 42 million. I haven't told anyone. I didn't know who I could trust. I needed to see who would still care when I had nothing." Laura's expression didn't change. She just listened, her eyes steady and calm. "I'm so sorry," Eleanor added quickly. "I didn't mean to lie to you. I didn't know what else to do." There was a long pause. Then Laura asked, softly but clearly, "And what are you going to do with it, Eleanor?" The question wasn't angry, it wasn't accusatory, it was curious, hopeful, open, as if Laura wasn't asking for an explanation, but a dream. Eleanor let out a laugh, watery and surprised. "I don't know," she admitted. "Not really, but maybe something good, maybe something that matters." Laura smiled wide this time. "Well then," she said, folding Eleanor into another hug, "let's figure it out together." Later that evening, Eleanor and Laura sat on the small balcony of Laura's apartment, wrapped in old crocheted blankets and sipping lukewarm chamomile tea. The city buzzed faintly in the background, but up here it was quiet enough to hear the wind brush through the leaves of the potted basil plant Laura kept near the railing. Eleanor felt lighter, but her heart was still crowded with emotion. The day had unravelled something old and raw inside her. She looked over at her aunt, who seemed lost in thought, eyes distant. "Can I ask you something?" Eleanor said quietly. "Of course." "Have you ever trusted someone, really trusted them, and then they just turned out to be someone else entirely?" Laura didn't answer right away. She set her mug down and clasped her hands in her lap. Then, with a small sigh, she began. "Robert," she said simply. Eleanor blinked. Your ex-husband? Laura nodded. We were married 11 years. Not perfect, but I thought we understood each other. Then my grandmother passed, and I inherited a little under 50,000. Not a fortune, but it was supposed to be for our future. A down payment on a house, maybe a trip, something special. Eleanor watched her aunt closely. Laura rarely spoke about her past, especially not with this level of openness. I told him we should sit down with a planner, map it out, but before we even had the chance, I discovered he'd already taken the money, transferred it out of our joint account into one I didn't know existed. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it, just shrugged and said, "It's our money. I have just as much right to it as you do." Eleanor's stomach twisted. I hadn't touched a cent, Laura continued. He spent it all. Some shady real estate investment his friend had pitched him at a poker night. The whole thing collapsed in 8 months. "I'm so sorry," Eleanor whispered. Laura gave a soft, bitter laugh. That wasn't even the worst part. The worst was what came after. He blamed me. Said I should have trusted him. That I made him feel small by insisting on planning. As if his betrayal was my fault. Eleanor felt something settle inside her. Recognition. That sharp twist of truth, being betrayed and then blamed for it. "I left him after that," Laura said. "Didn't look back. Took years to climb out of the debt he left me with. Years to trust again. Anyone, even myself." There was a long silence between them. Then Eleanor said, "So it's not just me?" Laura turned to her, her expression soft. "No, honey, it's not just you." "But why does money do that to people?" Laura smiled sadly. "Money doesn't change people. It reveals them. It strips away the performance, makes people show you who they really are when they think they have something to gain or something to lose." Eleanor nodded slowly, the words sinking in deeper than she expected. "Money's like a mirror," Laura added. "It doesn't lie, it just reflects." That sentence settled into Eleanor's bones. Money doesn't make people bad. It just shows you what was already there. She thought about her father's lecture, her sister's $100 apology, her brother's silence, Tina's block. Each reaction wasn't a surprise, it was a confirmation. "Then maybe I needed this," Eleanor murmured. "Not the money, but the truth." Laura reached over and took her hand. "Maybe you did." The city lights flickered on in the distance, one by one, like stars being switched back into place, and for the first time in a long time, Eleanor felt like she could see clearly. The next morning, Eleanor woke up earlier than usual. The city was still quiet, bathed in the soft grey light of dawn. She stood at the window of her apartment, holding a mug of coffee, her cap brushing against her ankle. For the first time in weeks, her thoughts weren't a tangle of grief and betrayal. Instead, she felt something new, something she hadn't allowed herself in a long time. Purpose. She sat at her desk, pulled out a fresh notebook and began writing. Not a journal entry, not a letter, but a blueprint. At the top of the page, she scrawled a title, Second Family Foundation. The idea had been simmering quietly in her mind ever since that lunch with Laura. Eleanor had spent her life surrounded by people who took and rarely gave, but there were so many others, silent, forgotten, who gave everything and asked for nothing. People like Laura, seniors living alone, scraping by on fixed incomes, quietly disappearing behind closed doors. What if she could build something for them? The foundation would focus on supporting elderly individuals who lived in isolation. Eleanor imagined meal delivery programs, companionship visits, emergency medical grants, and small home repairs. But more than that, she wanted it to be a community, a new kind of family for those left behind by their own. She made a list of next steps: legal filings, non-profit registration, hiring a small staff. She had the money, she had the time, now she had the why. Then she flipped to a new page. This one she labelled Laura. The first thing on the list: buy her a house, something modest, one story with wide hallways and a garden, something cosy and quiet within walking distance from wherever Eleanor ended up living. Second, set up a monthly stipend, but not as charity. She'd call it a retirement enrichment grant, awarded to Laura for being the founding inspiration of the foundation. It would cover all her medications, groceries and more, discreetly, respectfully. She even imagined creating a scholarship in Laura's name for young nurses or teachers who demonstrated compassion and resilience. Laura's kindness would ripple outward, touching lives beyond what either of them could imagine. But as Eleanor drafted her plans, one unfinished piece lingered like a loose thread. Her family. Not Laura, her other family. The ones who had failed her, the ones who had turned away. She had told herself they didn't matter anymore, that she didn't need closure, but the truth was the silence still itched beneath her skin. So she made one final note in her planner. Family meeting, one last time. Not to ask for money, not to test them again. This time it would be a reckoning, a moment of honesty. She rented a small event room at a neutral location, a quiet community hall with folding chairs and 2 bright lights. She sent carefully worded invitations. Please come. There's something important I need to say. No money involved, just truth. Some responded with suspicion. Others ignored her. A few said they'd be there, out of curiosity or guilt or the lingering hope that maybe there was something left to take. Eleanor didn't care why they came. She just wanted them to hear her. To see one last time who she really was. Not the bank, not the disappointment, not the emotional sponge they'd wrung dry. Just Eleanor, the woman they'd left behind. The air inside the rented community hall felt heavier than it should have. The windows were shut, the fluorescent lights too bright, the chairs too neatly arranged in a semicircle. Eleanor stood near a small folding table with a tray of water bottles and store-bought cookies, her hands calm, but her heart unsteady. They came, not all, but enough. Her mother, Janice, arrived first, with Warren trailing behind her like a shadow. Janice's face was tight with concern, but not the kind that comes from love, the kind that came from curiosity, laced with caution. Behind them came her sister Melanie, wearing sunglasses indoors and clutching her designer purse like it might shield her from emotional discomfort. Her father, Douglas, walked in briskly, greeting no one, choosing the seat closest to the door. Stephanie didn't come, but had apparently wished her well. Chris didn't show, neither did Tina. But her Aunt Jean appeared, perfume sharp and mouth already set in judgment. Cousin Marcus followed, face flushed, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. And finally, to Eleanor's immense comfort, Laura slipped in quietly, settling in the back corner without saying a word, just offering Eleanor a subtle nod of support. Eleanor took one last look at the people she had once called her safety net, her community, her blood. Then she began. "Thank you all for coming," she said, voice steady. "I know the invitation was vague. I appreciate you being here anyway." She didn't tell them she'd prepared for this moment like a trial. She didn't mention the pages of notes, the sleepless nights, the rehearsed responses for every possible interruption. "I want to start by saying I'm okay," she continued. "I found a new job, a better one. I'm stable. I don't need anything from you today." That last sentence caused a visible shift in the room. Shoulders dropped, muscles relaxed. Melanie exhaled in relief. Warren even allowed himself a small smirk. And Eleanor felt it, the unspoken thought drifting across their minds. Good. She's not here to ask for money again. "But I did want something else," Eleanor said, her voice rising slightly. "I wanted honesty." A pause. Then she looked at her mother. "Mom, I called you. I told you I was in trouble, that I needed help. And you said you'd ask Warren, then I never heard back. Why?" Janice blinked, caught off guard. "Sweetheart, we were about to help, but then you didn't follow up." "I did. I texted again. You read it. You didn't reply." Janice flushed. "Well, Warren thought it might be best if we didn't enable you." "Enable me?" Eleanor repeated. "You've always been independent," Warren interjected. "We figured you'd figure it out." Eleanor didn't argue. She just turned to her father. "Dad, you said no too. But more than that, you told people I was irresponsible, that I was still struggling to manage my life at 40. I saw the Facebook post, the comments. Douglas looked briefly ashamed but quickly recovered. It was a joke. Marcus exaggerated. Marcus squirmed. "I mean, you know how Dad talks. We were just messing around." "Messing around with my life," Eleanor said coldly. She turned next to Melanie. "Mel, I wasn't surprised you couldn't give much. I know you have your hands full. but the $100 felt more like a gesture than actual help. Melanie looked away, muttering, "It's all we could do. Your husband is a surgeon. You just finished renovating your bathroom. You posted it on Instagram." "Money's tight for everyone," Melanie snapped. "For some, more than others," Eleanor replied. She turned slowly to Aunt Jean. "And you told me I was being dramatic, that I should cut out my cat and coffee habits." "I was trying to give advice," Jean said defensively. "No, you were trying to make me feel small." The silence in the room deepened. Eleanor took a breath, steadying herself before she delivered the final blow, not with malice, but with clarity. "I reached out to each of you, not to test your wallets, but to test your hearts. I needed help, and you all, in different ways, made me feel like asking was wrong, like needing was shameful." She gestured towards Laura at the back. "She's the only one who asked if I'd eaten, the only one who offered more than money. She didn't judge me, didn't make excuses, she just showed up." Laura didn't speak, but her expression was calm and proud. "I'm not angry," Eleanor said. "I just needed to say this out loud, because I've spent years believing that if I gave enough, helped enough, supported enough, you'd all love me back the same way." She scanned their faces, some defensive, some uncomfortable, none apologetic. "And now I know," she finished, "that love doesn't always come back, and that's okay, because I know who does love me, who shows up." She turned towards Laura and smiled. "That's all." Without another word, she picked up her coat and walked out, the weight of a lifetime of expectation falling away behind her. Eleanor had barely turned her back when the sound of voices followed her. Low at first, then rising in volume as the chairs scraped and people stood. "Was that supposed to be some kind of guilt trip?" Melanie snapped, her voice sharp with wounded pride. She didn't even ask twice before going silent if she'd really needed help. "She played us," Marcus muttered, "made us look like bad people." "I didn't even get a real phone call," Aunt Jean said loudly. "Just some vague text. Who sends a text when they're desperate? That's manipulative." "She blindsided us," Warren added. "Brought us all here under false pretences. That's emotional blackmail, not honesty." Douglas, crossing his arms, said in a tired tone, "I told her life wasn't going to hand her anything. Maybe this little performance is how she processes failure, but that's not my fault." No one noticed that Laura had stayed seated. No one looked at her. No one asked her what she thought. Eleanor paused outside the door, her hand on the cool metal handle. She could hear them, all of them, turning her truth into betrayal, her pain into drama, her request for love into an accusation. She didn't open the door again. She didn't go back. Instead, she stood still for a long moment, let the words wash over her, and then let them go. Inside the hall, the conversation shifted. Blame passed like a baton in a relay. No one wanted to hold it for long. Janice, her mother, sat down slowly and shook her head. She's always been dramatic, even as a child, sensitive, always needed reassurance. Melanie scoffed. "I mean, who ambushes their entire family like this? What does she even want? An apology? A parade?" "She wants attention," Jean said, pursing her lips. "That's what this is. Some elaborate ploy to make us feel bad." Douglas checked his watch. If she really wanted to rebuild relationships, there are better ways. This just made everything worse. Laura finally stood. The room fell quiet, not out of respect, but confusion. They had forgotten she was there. She walked to the centre of the room, eyes scanning each face. "You know," she began, voice calm, "I didn't plan on speaking today. I came to support Eleanor, not to argue. But now that I've listened, I think I need to say something." No one interrupted. "I've watched her give and give and give to this family for years. Birthdays, weddings, emergencies, rent payments. She's shown up for all of you, sometimes when she had almost nothing herself. And the one time she asked for help, the one time she admitted she was scared and vulnerable, most of you didn't show up." "She could have just said she needed more time," Warren interjected. "She did," Laura said firmly, "and you looked away." "She tricked us," Marcus said. "This whole thing was a setup." "No," Laura replied, "it was a mirror. She didn't invent your responses. She didn't tell you how to act. She just gave you the chance to choose." Silence again. Laura looked at each of them, each fidgeting, avoiding her gaze. Some of you failed that choice, she said, and instead of acknowledging it, you're blaming her for holding up the mirror. Without waiting for a reply, she walked out the door. Later that evening, Eleanor sat alone on her apartment balcony, watching as the lights of the city flickered one by one into view. Her phone was silent, no missed calls, no texts, no apologies. She didn't expect any, and oddly, she didn't want them either. There was a time she would have ached for closure, for a moment where someone said, "I'm sorry, I was wrong. You didn't deserve that." But now she had something far better. Clarity. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel angry. What she felt was something quieter, more grounded, freedom. The years she'd spent trying to be enough for people who would only ever measure her by what she gave, that era was over. The little girl who once tried to earn love with perfect grades, the teenager who volunteered to babysit without being asked, the woman who paid her brother's rent and her sister's rehearsal dinner deposit, all of her, was finally done trying. They had shown her who they were, and she had finally believed them. She didn't need to expose them. She didn't need to punish them. She didn't even need to forgive them. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She just needed to move forward. The wind stirred softly around her as she leaned back in her chair, cat curled at her feet, a new file open on her laptop. It was titled Next Steps Foundation Launch. Tomorrow would come, and with it the work she truly cared about. Tonight, though, she let herself rest in the calm that follows release. And for the first time, peace didn't feel like something distant and hard-earned. It felt like something she had already chosen. 1 year later, the world Eleanor Brooks inhabited looked almost nothing like the one she'd left behind. She now lived in a modest but warm 2-bedroom bungalow nestled in a quiet Seattle neighbourhood. Just far enough from downtown to avoid the noise, but close enough to walk to her favourite bookstore and farmer's market. The home had a bright yellow front door, ivy climbing the porch rails, and flower beds she actually had time to tend. She had planted lavender and marigolds in the front, and mint and basil in the backyard. Each morning she opened her kitchen window and let the scent drift through as she made tea. But the most meaningful part of this new home wasn't its charm or its garden, it was its proximity. Just 3 blocks away, in a cosy 1-story craftsman with wide doorways and a screened-in porch, lived Laura. The move had been seamless. Laura's new place was paid for in full, with taxes, maintenance and utilities handled quietly through the Laura Wells Community Legacy Fund, a subtle but consistent monthly grant Eleanor had set up in her aunt's name. Laura never asked how it all came together. She just smiled when the paperwork arrived and said, "Well, I suppose the universe figured I'd earned a little comfort." Her health had improved too. No more skipping medications or stretching groceries to make ends meet. With proper care and less stress, her blood sugar was under control. Twice a week, she volunteered at the local library, leading a senior reading group. She taught them how to download ebooks on their phones and shared tea and stories that often turned into quiet therapy sessions. Their bond had grown deeper in that year. Every Friday night was wine and waffles, a ritual they'd started accidentally and kept religiously. They'd sit on Eleanor's porch, sip cheap red wine, and eat waffles piled high with fruit and cream, laughing like old friends who had nothing left to prove. But Eleanor hadn't simply escaped her past or built a sanctuary for herself. She had created something much larger. The Second Family Foundation had officially launched 6 months after that fateful family meeting. With the help of a small, passionate team, 2 social workers, a retired nurse, and a young logistics genius fresh out of grad school, Eleanor had turned her vision into a functioning, living, breathing support system. Their mission was clear: to find, serve, and uplift elderly individuals living alone, often forgotten or dismissed. They started small, just in Seattle, with a dozen pilot cases, but word spread fast. Now, 1 year in, they had served over 200 seniors. They provided weekly check-ins, grocery deliveries, basic home repairs, and small grants for essentials like eyeglasses, dental work and heating bills. But more than that, they offered presents. Each new member of the second family received handwritten welcome notes, birthday cards, and if needed, a human being at their side during doctor's visits, hospital stays, or just quiet dinners. Eleanor had spoken with every single one of them. She knew their stories, their losses, their joys, their favourite meals and the names of their childhood pets. Her office wall was lined with Polaroids, smiling faces, wrinkled hands holding flowers, birthday cakes with too many candles and not enough breath, a living timeline of the lives they had touched. When local media picked up the story, Eleanor declined to be interviewed. She didn't want her name attached to the spotlight. Instead, she had her lead social worker, Mina, speak on behalf of the organisation. "It's not about charity," Mina had said on air. "It's about dignity, about rewriting what it means to be seen, heard and loved after 70. Behind the scenes, Eleanor continued to manage the trust quietly, wisely. Her fortune was invested conservatively, spread out to fund not only the foundation's operations, but several future projects: a mobile clinic, a housing initiative, a digital literacy program for seniors who felt left behind in a tech-driven world. And yet, despite her growing influence, Eleanor still lived like the woman who once clipped coupons and counted every coffee purchase, not out of fear, but out of choice, because now every dollar she didn't spend on herself became a seed for someone else's peace. There were moments when the past still whispered, when she passed a familiar restaurant and remembered the night she cried after Tina blocked her, when she saw a family at the park and wondered if her own mother ever missed her, when she received a text from her father, brief and emotionless, on her birthday saying simply, "Hope you're doing well." But those moments didn't sting the way they used to, because she had stopped expecting people to be who they weren't capable of being. And she had stopped apologising for needing more honesty, more compassion, more love. Now, when she needed more, she built it, she created it, she became it. That was the victory, not the money, not the new house or the thriving foundation, but the quiet confidence that she had faced the truth, survived it, and shaped something beautiful from its wreckage. And when people asked her, when new volunteers or interns or donors asked her what inspired it all, she would always say the same thing. It started with a lie, she'd smile, and ended with a family. Though Eleanor had closed the door on most of her family, she had not locked it completely. In the months that followed her final meeting with them, she found herself returning to one particular thought. What if people truly didn't know how to love in the right way? What if all they were capable of giving was flawed, conditional, or fractured? So she gave them something else: distance and quiet help. She made anonymous donations when she saw her cousin, Marcus, had launched yet another shaky online business. She quietly covered a surprise medical expense after hearing through Laura that Aunt Jean had been hospitalised briefly. She even sent a book on parenting under an anonymous name to Melanie after Laura mentioned her niece was struggling with her oldest son's behaviour. But she never reached out directly, and she never signed her name. The most profound of these gestures came late one evening, when she stumbled upon a GoFundMe link someone had shared on a local forum. The story was from her brother, Chris. Laid off due to company downsizing, struggling with rent, anything helps, just trying to stay afloat. The profile picture was old, Chris still smiling, before the weight of his life had settled into his bones. Eleanor stared at the screen for a long while, not out of bitterness, not out of glee, but sadness. He hadn't reached out to her, maybe out of shame, maybe because he still believed she had nothing left to give, and that somehow hurt more than if he'd asked again. She didn't hesitate. Through the Second Family Foundation, under a pseudonym and without fanfare, she submitted a donation large enough to cover 2 months of his rent. She attached a message that simply read, "We all need help sometimes. Keep going." Then she closed the tab. She didn't check back. She didn't need to. Helping him didn't absolve what he'd done. It didn't rebuild trust or rewrite the past. But it allowed her to release something from her chest, a last strand of resentment she hadn't realised she was still carrying. Letting go, it turned out, didn't always feel like freedom. Sometimes it just felt quiet. One Saturday, months later, Eleanor was walking through her old neighbourhood. She had just finished a meeting with the local community centre that had offered to host an expansion branch for her foundation. On impulse, she took the long route back to her car, passing the duplex where she had lived for nearly a decade. It looked the same peeling paint on the front porch, same hydrangea bushes half alive from years of neglect. She paused for a moment, struck by how small it all looked now, and then she heard voices, laughter. She glanced across the street and saw them, her family, gathered in the front yard of Melanie's house. A folding table set up under a canopy, plates of food, children playing tag in the grass. The scene looked like something from a magazine, except she wasn't in it. She ducked slightly behind a parked car, not out of fear, but curiosity. Melanie was speaking, waving a wine glass. And then she just walked out like we owed her something, like years of being there for her didn't count. Laughter. Douglas added, if she really had hit rock bottom, she'd have stayed humble. Instead, she staged some dramatic performance. Honestly, Janice chimed in, I still think she's hiding something. That meeting felt calculated. I think she got some kind of inheritance, Aunt Jean said, or maybe a secret boyfriend. Who knows with her? She just wanted attention, Marcus concluded, reaching for another beer. Eleanor stood still. For a moment she considered walking over, telling them the truth, laying everything bare, the money, the silence, the donations, demanding they see her. But instead she smiled. Not bitterly, not with triumph, but with peace. Because in that moment she understood something important. They would never know her. Not really. Not because she hadn't tried, but because they had never looked past what she could offer them. Never asked who she was when she wasn't giving, and they never would. And that was okay. She had stopped waiting for people to value her enough to change. She had stopped tying her worth to their recognition. She didn't need their understanding to validate her journey. She had her own table now, her own family, her own kind of love. Eleanor turned away from the scene and continued walking, the sun dipping low behind her, casting long golden shadows on the sidewalk. The breeze was soft, cool against her skin. Each step away from them felt lighter. She didn't glance back, not once. And that was the real ending, not dramatic, not loud, not vengeful. Just free.